Now, you guys may remember that Chick-fil-A is very controversial. A lot of progressives don't like the restaurant. There have been cases where people were boycotting the restaurant, not in just refusing to go there, but they were forming human chains, preventing others from going into a Chick-fil-A. And one of the reasons they did this is because Chick-fil-A donated money to the Salvation Army. Now, the Salvation Army is a Christian organization, a Christian charity, which is supposed to take care of the homeless, among other things. But they weren't very progressives when it came to LGBT issues at the time. And this sparked the ire of a lot of journalists and people in the press. So they viewed it as homophobic to donate money to the Salvation Army, which is what got Chick-fil-A into trouble. Now, what's interesting is that the Salvation Army actually tried their best in order to be more progressive when it comes with the times, to be more acceptance on the LGBT issue. And to no one's surprise, it didn't seem that this affected the number of people donating to the Salvation Army. It didn't actually affect their bottom line, because Christians were like, okay, well, you know, you're more accepting of gay people now, that's fine, and they still donated. But now that they decided to be anti-racist, well, it is causing a controversy, and there's a lot of people pulling money away from the Salvation Army. So the question is, like, are people really racist and they don't want to donate to the Salvation Army? Or is it more like a thing that it's not what's really in the box type of argument? It's like the Democratic Republic of North Korea isn't really a democracy, even though it's in the name. Or I've been told this by a lot of left-leaning people, National Socialism isn't socialism, even though it's in the name. So maybe it's the same thing here. Maybe it is not really about being anti-racist. Maybe it's about other policies that aren't advertised on the box. So we're going to look at what they're actually saying. And really in the beginning, it's like, why do salvationists need to talk about racism? And they say that you need to have a conversation about race. But I'll tell you something, okay? If we're going to have a conversation and you're going to give me Robin DiAngelo's book, that's fine. You know, I'll take it, I'll read it, but I want you to read some Thomas Sowell in exchange. So if you're not going to read my literature, but you want me to read your literature, then it's not a conversation. Then it's preaching. Then it's a monologue. Now, when I give money to charity, I don't want you to preach me. Like, even the most vile charity organizations that existed, because there were a lot of them, by the way, in the past. Like, for example, you had a couple of people that went to spread Christianity in faraway places. So they would go to a village that's starving, and they would say, hey, I'm not giving you food unless you read Jesus. Right? So a lot of Christians didn't like that. They didn't like when they found out where their money is going to these organizations. And I want to point out that the organization would actually lecture the person that was receiving the money. They would never lecture the person donating the money. I think this is the first time in human history where you get to notice an organization lecturing you while you give it money. This is very bizarre. The second thing is that they're actually saying that Christians were racist, so we need to apologize. So the actual Christian organization wants me to apologize on their behalf, like WTF. If I'm going to apologize, it's going to be between me and God. Well, I'm not a Christian, so I'm an atheist. But still, you know, you get the point. Like, how the fuck does that work? You're a Christian organization that did bigotry in the past, and you want me to apologize on your behalf. Fuck is wrong with you? Now, let's go to what they actually understand by race, and why, you know why they don't want to have a conversation? They actually say, like, after the conversation happens, like, what needs to happen is the participants are encouraged to further explore the issue discussed. In other words, they're not going to change their mind. Like, they already know the discussion, they already know what they're going to tell you, and then it's up to you to do blah, blah, blah. They're not the ones that are going to get any sort of feedback from the conversation, which is very bizarre. But anyway, right, so as we go here, they start talking about why race is a social construct. So in other words, race is something we just invented, we created. And they say race is not biological. It is a social construct. There is no gene or cluster of genes common to all blacks or all whites. So, I'm really curious, like, do these people think that if you have a black family and the woman gives birth to a healthy white baby boy, that the husband isn't going to have some questions to ask? Because according to them, it's not genetic, right? Like, there is no genes that have to do with race. So if that's the case, right? Like if the writer of this article is white and goes home to his white wife and she comes from the hospital with an Asian baby boy, now they start trying to do postmodernist deconstruction, and they will say something like, what is considered white in the United States can be considered black in Europe. Alternatively, like a darker skinned Italian can be considered brown in Romania. And all of it is true, by the way. And the reason this is true is because doctors do not use the concept of race. We use the concept of ancestry. And it's kind of like the same argument they make for transgenderism and the abolition of gender. So the abolition of gender kind of works like this. It's like, how many sexes are there? And you say, well, there's two. Which are they? XX and XY. But what do you do with the XXXY? You see, it's a social construct. None of it is real. We need to abolish all of the thing. Now, it's interesting because they will never advocate for the abolition of race. So in other words, if you're a white person and you say, hey, I want to identify as American Indian, because I found out that my great ancestor was actually from a specific tribe, and because of that, I now identify as an American Indian, and when I go to a university, I want to be able to check the box that I'm a minority. I want to obtain all of the privileges that come with being a minority in the United States. If you do that, they will freak out. In fact, there are people who did that and got into trouble for doing that. Right? It's viewed as gaming the system. So when it comes to gender, they want to abolish it, but when it comes to race, they want to reinforce it. But at the same time, they just want to say that it's a social construct and it's got nothing genetic to do with it, even though it's got genetics to do with it, because yet again, two black people are never going to have an Asian baby. Now, it's interesting because in the past, the ideology, like people who are against racism that are liberal, they admit that there are genetic differences, but they consider these genetic differences not to be significant enough to warrant any type of legal discrimination. So this ideology, the liberal way of thinking, to me, is a lot more rooted in reality than the progressive way of thinking that is completely in la la land. So they go forth and they explain what is the definition of racism. So there's actually many types of racism, but you need to understand it's just the prejudice, treatment, stereotyping, or discrimination of people of color on the basis of race. So it's only when people of color get discriminated. So first of all, they say race is a social construct. Now they say that only people of color that are discriminated is actually racism. So in their mind, if a white person gets discriminated in China, that's not racism, that's fine. Or for example, if the Chinese are oppressing the Uyghurs, that's also not racism. Because it's people of color oppressing people of color. That is not racism. So racism, in their definition, is only when a white person is oppressing a person of color. That's it. Okay, so what does oppression mean? Well, it can be individual, which can have belief, attitudes, and actuals of the individual that support or perpetuate racism. But it can also be institutional. And institutional is when there are discriminatory treatments, unfair policies, or biased practices based on race that result in inequitable outcomes for whites over people of color. So in other words, what you need to understand is that you can have an entire room where not a single person is racist, but the room itself can be racist. So for example, if you are to, and I give this example a lot of the times, but this is how progressives and these corporate woke people think, because this has to do with corporate wokeism, all right? Like it's not what the people on the ground experience. This is something studied in academia and dictated top down from corporations and politicians to the masses. It's not what like the people on the ground started thinking and hey, like the civil rights movement, for example, that was from on the ground. Like the civil rights movement, you had people saying, we want equal rights. This is not about that. This is from academia, from politicians, from corporations, from the mainstream media, and it's their ideology. It's the ideology of the elites trickling down to the masses. So what they believe is that if you have, for example, a standardized test, they think standardized tests are racist, by the way. And a standardized test can be, all right, I need you guys to work at my warehouse. And at my warehouse, you're going to have to pick up heavy boxes. So what I want you to do is to pick up this boulder to show me that you have the body strength in order to work at my warehouse efficiently. Now, there is nothing racist about this test. Anyone can join. You can be white, you can be black, you can be a man or a woman. Anyone can try to pick up the rock. But some people will pick up the rock, some people won't. Now, what they say is that if, for example, only men manage to pick up the rock and not a single woman managed to do it, then the test itself, even though it's standardized and all the women could attempt to pick it up, but because not a single woman picked it up, then the test is sexist. And my company is suffering from misogyny. So I need to come up with a different test. Now, obviously, what this does is that if we allow people who can't pick up the rock to go into the warehouse and work, they're going to be unhappy with their work because literally they can't physically do it. They couldn't pick up the rock, so they're not going to be able to pick up the packages. Which means that I'm going to hire some people at that warehouse who aren't going to do a proper job, and the other people that can do the job are going to have to work harder to compensate for the ones that can't work. And by the way, it completely excludes the possibility that the people who can't pick up a rock, maybe lifting heavy weights isn't for them, and maybe they could be very good at a desk job, or maybe they could be very good at driving a truck. I mean, there's other jobs that require a completely different set of skills, to the point where not everyone has to pick up the rock. But let's say that in your test, you have more white people than blacks that manage to pick up the rock. Well, now the test is racist, right? Because, well, it's not equitable. It's not the correct number. Think of the Oscars, where they will say, because there's too many white people gaining Oscars, then the competition is racist. They will not say which black person they think deserves an Oscar, but they will just automatically state that unless you have the exact same percentage of black people, like it's in the demographic of the United States, gaining Oscars, then the competition is racist. And it doesn't take into account, going back to my previous example with the warehouse, that maybe around that warehouse, there aren't that many black people, right? Like usually people find a job in their near vicinity. So maybe they didn't apply to pick up the rock because they didn't knew about the job offering, or maybe they knew about the job offering but they weren't interested. So if that is the case, then it's still racism. Why? Because it's considered that my company might have hostile environment, which is pushing away black people from joining. So for example, you can have a person like Thomas Sowell, which is espousing an ideology on Twitter, like when he's off work hours, when he's not picking rocks, is going on Twitter and he's saying jokes, and this is pushing people away from applying, which means that now you need to fire Thomas Sowell in order to make room for other people that have the correct mindset and the more positive and welcoming attitude. So they go on, and they talk about how white people are racist by default just because they're born that way, but take into account that race isn't genetic, but all whites are racist because of the sins of their ancestors. They go on and they talk about how colorblindness is harmful. So colorblindness means treating people the same regardless of their race. This is how discrimination ended in my country over left-handed people. I'm pretty sure some of you might have heard, I don't know how old you are, but here in Eastern Europe, people who are left-handed in school, they got punished. I mean, I remember my teacher just would smack people with this big stick on the hand every time they would write with their left hand. And there was like actual bigotry against people with left hand. I think this had to do a little bit with communism, like everyone needs to be the same. I have no idea why. But over time, like the people that were left-handed stopped getting discriminated. And the reason it happened, like the reason discrimination stopped, is because everyone just stopped talking about it. Like people would treat a left-handed person the same way you would treat a right-handed person. I mean, even the thought of treating someone differently because of the way they write doesn't even occur to me now. So the way discrimination can end is actually by stop talking about it, by like just stop focusing so hard on it. But I don't think like these people are interested in achieving that. I think it's quite the opposite. Because they get money. So the person who wrote this got money from the Salvation Army to write this. The person organizing these things are making loads of cash. It's an entire industry where it's in their self-interest to keep perpetuating race so that they keep making money. If there was a button that I could press and racism would stop, these people would try to kidnap me. So I don't get to press it. Because it immediately conflicts with their business model. I'm willing to bet that there is an entire multi-billion-dollar industry at this point just focusing with anti-racism in the United States. If you take every single diversity officer, if you take every single politician that has his platform entirely based around race, if you take all the NGOs and all of these other people, and you add them together, I wouldn't be surprised if it goes all the way to billions of dollars. I'm curious if anyone made the calculation, but I wouldn't be surprised. Now, finally, the main reason that I believe most people are against this ideology isn't because they're racist, but because, as far as I can see, there is absolutely no evidence that this ideology works. I haven't seen any study, any figure, any percentage of showing me, since almost every single corporation in the United States has some form of diversity training, how much did America become less racist? In fact, looking around, it seems that the racial tensions in the US are higher than they have ever been in my lifetime. And I'm telling you this from the outside perspective. I'm telling you this as a Romanian who has no bone to pick in this race. It just seems that more and more people are noticing. It's like, okay, so you want us to censor, you want us to stop making quote-unquote offensive posts on Twitter, you want us to stop doing microaggressions, you want us to become more inclusive and do all of these things and donate money to these organizations and all of that. But where are the results? Where are the end results? What have you accomplished? The only thing they say is that there is more work to be done. And I think more and more people are noticing that the reason there is more work to be done is that they are not doing any work. The only thing they're doing is they're making themselves rich, getting nice, comfy corporate position. Oftentimes, these diversity officers earn more than the actual people that are creating the products at those companies. And people are noticing that, and they're becoming more and more angry. It's like, imagine being an IT guy where you're making software for a software creating company, and you're earning less than the diversity officer, and you're crunching the numbers, you're spending there 12 hours a day, and the diversity officer gets to clock out after 6 hours and does almost nothing, except maybe send some emails to people and tells them to be careful about their microaggression. And they earn sometimes double or triple the wage. How is that fair? Why would people like that? And I think, yeah, people are noticing that this is a cash grab. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the comment section. Take care.